All right, we're good.
Yeah, you're coming in clean. Quinn,
Cool.
you can let folks in. Hello, hello.
Just a reminder to stay in the middle of the screen so that when people get it broadcast, it's ear centered.
Looking good right now?
Yep, you both are looking good.
Beautiful. Evening, everybody.
Hello, Jared.
Hope everyone's doing well. Thank you guys for coming in and joining us this evening. Got a lot to talk about. We'll give folks a minute or two to join in, and then we can get off to the races here. Tony, Scott, Avenis, Paul, Eric, Chris, got more people joining us. Hope everyone's doing well.
Yep, doing well enough. I just want to confirm, can you see the soccer field or did I turn that off successfully?
You are all good now.
Cool. Thank you.
We don't mind a little sporty background though.
Right. I mean, all about a little soccer.
There's a lot of soccer around here.
A couple more folks. We'll give it one more minute. I see some returning faces. I see some new faces. We'll do intros to kick things off.
Hello, sir.
Hello, hello.
How are you?
Good, thank you. I would ask if for Steve and I will be running the show. We ask everyone stay on mute throughout the conversation. We'll hold Q&A towards the end. If at any point throughout the talk you have questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. We'll certainly, stop and answer anything that comes in. And then once we get through the program, we'll save time at the end for a Q&A. Quinn, my co-pilot on this, is also moderating, and he'll be monitoring the chat in case we skip over anything. We're pretty good at keeping our eyes on it, but it's always good to have a third set in there. I think we can kick things off. It's good to see everyone. Many of you already know me. My name is Jared Alper. For those who don't, I'm Goodparty's political director. I lead our team in working with many of the candidates who are on this call and many, many more who are not. We have 2,000 candidates to date. Just came through a stretch of several elections in the month of August and are gearing up towards November, as I'm sure many of the folks on this call are as well. We've got a lot to cover tonight. First and foremost, I'm happy to have Steve Krim here, a longtime friend. I would, at the risk of stroking his ego, might even call him a mentor in my early days of campaigning. Steve, it's good to have you in here with us tonight, man.
Thank you, Jared. Thank you for the opportunity.
So we are covering public relations tonight, and specifically how candidates and elected officials can build their public image, a public perception, and essentially the brand throughout the campaign, how to build it, sustain it, and specifically navigate the sort of media environment that a lot of candidates run into to sustain and help define themselves over the course of the campaign, which is something, Steve, I know you know quite a lot about and have quite a lot of opinions about. Before we dive in, I'd love if you could just give the folks on this call a little bit about your background in the campaign space and even maybe how we originally got connected.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jared. Thank you for the opportunity. I really relish the opportunity to be here tonight and talk to you all. I think it's really important, as you all are candidates, to get some advice on how to proceed with your campaigns. And a lot of times those opportunities do not are not available, right? So my background is I cut my teeth in kind of Republican politics. I did that for a very long time. Ran campaigns actually starting in 2002 in Maryland as a Republican, and had some challenges there. And but we saw also some successes. And then the big race was 2014, where I ran Larry Hogan's campaign. We had worked together for about 5 years to develop a strategy to convince Democrats to support a Republican, which is a huge, tall order these days. But then after Hogan, he has a very moderate message, definitely centrist, considered running as an independent for president in 2024. But I met Jared actually on the 2018 Neil Simon campaign, who decided he wanted to run for as an unaffiliated, and saw his announcement as an unaffiliated candidate, reached out to him and said, I align with you on these issues and would love to help you out. So that's how I got with Neil Simon, and then how I met Jared, and we've been working together ever since, supporting a lot of unaffiliated campaigns all over the country, in Missouri and elsewhere. So really excited about the opportunity to talk to you all tonight, and see where we go from there.
Thank you, Steve. And I think even the first, to help provide context, because I always look to Governor Hogan. For those who don't know, Larry Hogan was the governor of Maryland from 2014 to 2022. And an unusual case study in a Republican, in this case, elected official in a very progressive state. There are other examples on the Democratic side. It's something we're trying to build towards in the independent space as well. But an interesting case study where he was widely perceived and regarded by people kind of regardless of their politics. It's unusual to have a 70+ approval rating in any state, regardless of how many Democrats or Republicans are there. I think it's relevant to this conversation because I think a lot of people are saying, well, how does that even happen? How can someone, especially maybe in an unfavorable political climate, build a reputation as someone in such a way that they are seen so favorably? So I think that's where we'll kick it off, which is the broad question is, how did that come to pass, that situation developed with Hogan?
So a lot of it was really focused on where people were, and where I think actually an overwhelming majority of Americans are today. I think what we were able to identify was even in Maryland, there's a socially moderate fiscal conservative viewpoint out there, right? And there's actually even somewhat of a libertarian vein to it. So Hogan and I actually started in 2009 building a concept of how a successful campaign could work. And we started messaging on it very early on. So starting in 2011 with a message of change, and just continued to just drill it down and build our following and build our organization out and a list of supporters. And then when we were finally governor, or decided to run for governor in 2014, we had a built-in list and already had established ourselves as a voice of kind of social moderation, fiscal conservatism, which worked really well in 2014. We were able to win. And then as a governor, what we really focused on was how could we appeal to the moderates. And what happens is all over the country, and it doesn't matter if you're in Maryland or if you're in Minnesota or Missouri or Mississippi even.
All the
right?
M states.
It doesn't matter where you are. So what happens is you have a group of people that would self-identify as ultra conservative, and then you have a group of people that would identify as ultra liberal, and then you have all these people in the middle, and they don't necessarily identify as ultra conservative or ultra liberal. They just want someone that listens to them and will align with them on important issues. And those issues are always like just 3 or 4, and it varies depending on what election year you're in. It varies based off the economy and whether or not we're in good economic times or bad economic times, whether or not we're in like a crime/education time period, but it there's always this group of moderates that no one's talking to, and the reason why is because of with Maryland, in Maryland we have a statewide race, right? So we don't have to worry about congressional districts, and we don't have to worry about gerrymandering. But with legislative races and with congressional races, there's always gerrymandering involved, and they have to answer to those extremes. But there is an overwhelming majority of people out there that identifies in the middle. It's a matter of talking to them and listening to them and meeting them where they are.
And there was, I think there's certainly a place for talking about voters and the issues and talking about ideas, whether they're liberal, conservative, moderate, independent, Democrat, Republican. But there was always a layer, I felt at least, having been on a campaign near, when we were doing the race in 2018, we often just were in the same places as the governor and his team. But there was something that almost felt more about him as a person and as sort of a brand than about any sort of given political messaging. And so for the people on this call who might be candidates, I'm curious how much of values or personality it contributes to that versus something that may be hard to replicate, at a statewide level versus a smaller campaign. How much does the personality of the candidate yield to image, or is it really all about policy and politics?
Actually, very little has to do with policy or politics. It has everything to do with authenticity and the personality of the candidate. And the first question I have when I work with candidates today is, where do you really stand? What do you really care about? What do you really want to do? Don't tell me what you think you need to do. Tell me what you want to do, right? From a policy perspective, but also what's important. And with the candidates, it's all about authenticity. I've talked to like tons of losers out there, many losers, and they were all like, I want to run, I want to do this. I'm like, all right, well, you got to be authentic, right? And then they decided they weren't going to be authentic, and they would lose their race. And you have to be true to yourself. You have to be true to your core principles, and you might have to pick the right year to run in order to make sure those things align correctly. But you, as a candidate, people can see right through you when you're a fake. And I think that actually what we're seeing right now in the presidential level, and why Trump was successful in 2016 and everything else is that authenticity level. And when you're trying to mimic somebody else and what someone else did, you're not going to be nearly as successful as when you're just an authentic messenger of what you truly believe. It makes it easy, right? You don't have to have speech writers. You don't have to have a ton of messaging team around you. You don't have to have polls or surveys to follow your heart.
Yeah, I think, I always come back to the idea. I mean, when we work with candidates here, why you're running and finding your authentic sort of reason to run is always where we're leading as well. And I do think it sells, when you see a candidate, and certainly Hogan wasn't the only one. There are plenty of, I often look at it as sort of Democrats in red states and sort of the traditional dynamic, Republicans in blue states where you have to appeal to maybe people who disagree with you. But even down ballot, the candidates who generally kind of, I think, rise up are the ones who there's something there in terms of how they sort of communicate and build their self-image around the idea of authenticity and just like being a personable human. And so I guess my question to you is, if you were, trying to kick a campaign off, there are many candidates on this call. What is sort of the approach, right? How do you help a candidate find that authentic message and then build on top of it to basically build out a campaign before even talking about getting in front of journalists or TV cameras or any of the other media sort of outlets that are out there to help spread that message?
Well, I think the biggest point is find out what's important to you and write it down and put it down on paper, right? Like, why are you running? That's the ultimate. And then you have to start narrowing that why you're running down into like a 2 or 3 minute speech, right? We call it the elevator pitch. And once you've figured out why you're running, then you can start taking care of some of the other items on the list, like palm cards and handouts and whatever else it is with the campaign. But why do you personally want to do this? And then start test marketing, right? Talk to your friends and your family, say, hey, this is what I want to run. What do you think? And a lot of times what you're going to hear is probably a pretty favorable response to it. Look, I think a lot of people are intimidated by running for office. The parties have certainly done it, have made it even harder to run. But there's plenty of space and plenty of room for some common sense people to run based off their own personal beliefs and be successful.
So you get to a place, right, where you're off to the races. Many people, right? I mean, we're at the point of year where even locally, right, people are starting to gear up. I always think of Labor Day as that moment in the calendar where it's go time and people are really starting to pay attention to races. And maybe not the presidential, that's obviously been in front of us for a while. But it's time where, I think even local press or local people start looking around their ballots and saying, hey, who am I voting for a city council seat this year?
Right.
And so knowing that, and knowing that, I think there is a role for candidates to understand how to interact with the media, hopefully to start building out their sort of story and their image. I guess the question I have for you is, first and foremost, what do you see as the sort of trick of the trade in sort of first engaging with members of the press? I see the eyebrows raised. I know that you maybe carry some scars from dealing with the press in your past life. But what would be the sort of first point of contact at this point in a cycle to start telling that story through the press?
Look, I think the biggest thing is just having a conversation with them to begin with, right? So you got to reach out, schedule coffee, schedule time to meet with them, do it off the record or on the background, just kind of outlining why you're running. They might see a value in a story there, they might not, but you're playing the percentages at that point. The best baseball players in the world miss 70% of the time, and so and when dealing with the media, you just got to talk to them, and hopefully one of them will click, and then remember always in the back of your mind they're trying to create a story out of your conversation, and so you have to be careful. But if you remain true to your beliefs and stay authentic, it's not nearly as intimidating as it needs to be. There's plenty of times where you've had we can have a really good conversation with a reporter and they write a really positive story, and it's just a matter of engaging them. Really, they're human. They put their shoes on one shoe at a time, and you just establishing those relationships is really critical. Even right now, I always avoided the press as much as I possibly could. Don't do interviews or anything like that. But most recently, I'm talking to them probably 2 to 3 times a week, if not more. And during the Hogan campaign in 2014 and even prior, we were an open book with everyone, and that's how we handled our administration as well. We were just a complete open book to all the press, as much access as they wanted to give them, and we were authentic, so we didn't have to worry about messing anything up.
You raised an interesting point, the broad one, which is that they're journalists or people, or if you're dealing with people even at the local level, a lot of times they've got other things going on in their life. They may not be focusing about campaigns as much as the candidate or their team is thinking about it. And I would be willing to bet there are candidates on this call, there for sure have been candidates previously on these calls, who will come to me after and say, I'm trying, but the press just isn't paying attention. And I'll ask, well, did you reach out to them, or have you been trying to engage them? And they say, no, I'm the candidate. They're supposed to come to me.
Right.
So I guess, it's an interesting thing to flag, which is reaching out to journalists is sometimes the first step just to even have an introduction, right? And to get people to pay attention to the fact that you're running. And by building up a relationship, you never know what can come of it.
It only good can come from the relationship. I really truly believe that. as long as you are true to who you are, right? I've always been a believer, as long as I tell the truth, I don't have to remember what I said. And I think that's the case with dealing with reporters. As long as you're telling the truth, as long as you're being authentic, there's never going to be a gotcha moment, right? Because you're being true to who you are. And the earlier you reach out to them, the better. And then you have a relationship. And whether or not you're successful this time around or not, it doesn't really matter. You'll continue to have that relationship. And you can, if you decide to run again or whatever, you can always go back to those relationships you have with reporters. But that's not just for reporters, it's with anyone, right? As long as you're true and authentic to who you are, you're going to have good relationships with them.
And, I think there is a difference, right? If you're running, I mean, there's certainly a difference if you're running for a big office, like obviously president or a governor's race or United States Senate. But I think there's also, compared to, more local offices where maybe the local journalists aren't even necessarily, they're not working the New York Times beat. They're oftentimes, in a very small shop, and they're eager to talk to people. I could go on a tangent. On my member of Congress was George Santos back on Long Island until he wasn't anymore. And that was a story that the local press was the only ones to catch until after he got elected.
Right.
But I think there is a little bit of a distinction between how sometimes journalists or just the ecosystem of media thinks about independence and unaffiliated candidates versus partisan candidates. So I know we've experienced that in dealing with, some bigger ticket maybe races.
Right.
I'm curious if you take any wisdom that you can share about specifically how to navigate being an independent in a media environment that maybe just isn't used to that.
Sure. So, look, I think that first of all, we're talking about U.S. Senate races and statewide races, right? That's not really it. I don't know if that's necessarily the audience here, right? But there's always beat reporters and local reporters, and they're constantly looking for stories because there's not that national undertone every single day. I mean, the 24-hour news cycle kind of misses the local level. And I think what we focusing in on local reporters, and they're always looking for content, local blogs, and look, some of the best news sources in Maryland are kind of blogs, right? It's those political group blogs that everyone reads, but and they're constantly looking for content, especially at the local level. And I think it's more about reaching out, having those conversations with them, and seeing where it goes from there, because they're looking for that content. And you always have to find the news hook, and the part where it's really difficult is being able to show them or convince them that, hey, this is a news hook that you really can care about.
And the question I would have on top of that is, okay, so let's say someone bites, right? Even if it's a, you don't have to approach every interview as if you're being interviewed by a major news outlet, but it's still always good to be prepared. If say you reach out to a local journalist and say, do you want to have coffee? And they say, yeah, sure, that'd be great. What is sort of top of your mind when you work with candidates and a news a request or a media request comes in terms of preparing that person to be able to define maybe their goals, but also prepare themselves for how to handle a situation where they might be on the record with a reporter?
Number one, I think the most important thing is to establish that friendship or that relationship early on in the conversation. Identify areas where they agree, and what we used to do is we used to look at their articles and what they had written, and so we kind of knew kind of where they were coming from, based off of the content of what they've written prior, and we could prepare the candidate for the interview based off of that, right? So prepping for questions or whatever. It's good to go through that exercise, but again, like we were talking about local races where you don't have the resources of having consultants and media advisors and that sort of thing. So I think the most important thing is really focus on where you are and what you stand for and why, and getting that message across in those interviews. And reporters are going to appreciate it. They really are actually looking for content. That's is the weirdest thing right now. Newsprint is struggling, and they're looking to create news. And if you can create it and kind of upset the apple cart in some sort of way, it's going to be helpful. And they're going to want to, as I used to say, they're always trying to make a story, and they're really in the business of selling newspapers. So, and you only sell newspapers through conflict.
It's a good point, right? Like, and it almost sounds redundant to continue saying it, but I think candidates sometimes forget it, which is, oftentimes it's just understanding and continuing to say why you're running over and over and over again, because even if you say it 5 times a day, the people who are meeting you are hearing it for the first time. And
Right.
it's the message discipline, which I know is something you and I have spoken a lot about over the years.
Yeah. You never have to answer the question they ask. Just answer the question you want to answer is the key to dealing with, that's what the old saying, right? But, yeah, it's changed a little bit, but the message discipline is really critical. They used to say you have to hit someone 7 times in order for them to remember something. I think that number is up into the 70s now, with all the social media and all these new messages that we get hit on every single day. It's insane how much information Americans consume on a day-to-day basis, and trying to cut through all that noise it's really difficult. And what I would do is in a campaign today is, I would utilize the news media as much as possible to generate stories that I can just share and cut into pieces and then utilize on my social media spaces all the time, right? Either through organic creation or even through advertising. So one news story you could turn into 17 or 18 different social media posts / advertisements.
Yeah, I mean, each piece of, let's say, content is almost an opportunity for momentum, right? I remember there were moments where it was a struggle to get journalists to pay attention, even local journalists to local campaigns, because it's a sort of an echo chamber environment, and everyone's catching news from all over the place. But if and when you find the opportunity, it wasn't just one story, it was an opportunity to tell multiple sort of different angles to, again, why someone was running using the same link over and over.
Mhm.
I want to talk a little bit as well about specifically, like, you're dealing with a candidate and they are in a situation where maybe they are, I mean, I think especially even with not just with press, but with some of these other groups that are out there that are looking to better understand who someone is and why they're running, and try and pin a candidate down on a specific issue, maybe in a way that makes them uncomfortable because it's a little bit off message. What are maybe any tips from a veteran Politico to getting back into your comfort zone and staying on message when maybe the forces of whatever it is are trying to pull you in a different direction?
So we used to call them off ramps and on ramps, right? So,
Like
yeah. So if there's a question that's asked that you really don't like, you're trying to get off that ramp as quickly as you can and get back to the content that you want to, and then vice versa. Um, when they ask you a question that you like, you stick on it for as long as possible. It's like a filibuster, uh, and and just creating the noise in the conversation. I think is it, it distracts the reporter from what they want to accomplish. Right now, if you're dealing with a professional reporter that's been around the block for a while, they don't really fall for it. But look, we're not at the local level. That these are not difficult reporters. These are generally good people that are really trying to write good stories and good content. And I think in determining what that content is, it's really where the people are in a certain district or a certain area, and what do they care about. And again, like I said earlier, we always looked at what the reporter had been writing about, because that's what they cared about too. So we would make sure that we were giving them a little bit of a carrot to cover whatever we wanted them to cover as far as the story. But look, controversy sells newspapers, and it sells media, and it generates eyes on whatever content you create.
I'd also say, right, like sometimes, and I'll give a shameless, maybe not shameless, but a very concerted push for the tools that we're building at goodparty.org, which is intended to help candidates sort of navigate the space. So for the people who are running, many of whom I imagine have created accounts with us, we've taken the time to come up with all of the different ways, essentially, to engage the press. One of the things that we encourage candidates to do is send press releases that can be generated directly using the AI that we built. And Steve and I have done it many, many times where we just send a press release to a journalist. I think oftentimes reading an article that they've written and trying to say, hey, we care about the same issue. Here's a press notification about something that we're going to do about it. And then that it's almost like reeling in a fish, where they say, hey, this is an interesting candidate who seems to care about an issue that I care about.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's talking to them at their level. That's what you have to do with every single voter, right? You have to meet them where they are, and you have to do the same thing with reporters. You got to meet them where they are. If they're, covering a certain thing, you've got to figure out the angle for them. You got to figure out what's important to it, why what you want to say is important to them, and how it will help them get through that editorial process and generate interest to whatever they're writing. And it's a challenge. Look, it's not easy. It's a challenge, and but you can break through. Anyone can break through, especially if they look. I said at the very beginning of our conversation, that relationship with that reporter is so important, because while they might not write a story from that coffee, that off the record coffee, or on the background coffee that you have with them early on, if you can create a genuine relationship with them, they're going to include you in future stories, and they'll come to you for future quotes and content. So it's that early stage conversation that's so critical to when you're in the trenches.
Yeah, I want to dive a little deeper into that, because I know it's something that I think really propelled the early campaign, right? Every campaign is local, I think, until it's not. So every campaign starts, even if you're running for governor, president, whatever it might be, you're starting with a small group of people, and you just have to grow really quickly if you're running for a bigger office. But part of I think the success of the campaign that was run in 2014 was that over time, you and the governor were almost the point of contact for ideas contrary to the existing administration, and we're constantly being sought after for your opinion or for stories about that. If I remember correctly, I wasn't there. But
I mean, look, what we did in 14, we had already created that image, right, of a candidate who was for fiscal conservatism, and the issue then was taxes and the budget. 14 was a unique year, but that was our messaging. That's where we had created a reputation. That's where we went. As far as the campaign was concerned, no one gave us a chance to win, but we just kept repeating that message over and over and over again, and over again and over again. And that's what we did. It was really impactful. It worked. That was where the message discipline really took over, and where we really cut our teeth and created a reputation of message discipline. After we won, everyone wanted to talk to us all the time, and the discipline at that point was to say no, we're not actually going to have this conversation. We're not going to go down this road with you. And when you're running a campaign and when you're a candidate for office, you really want to make sure that when you've developed what's so important to you, where you really want to talk and where you really want to run your campaign on, you want to make sure that those are you weigh in on those issues and you don't allow the other issues that might not necessarily help you be successful. Make sure you don't talk on those issues. Talk on the issues that are going to make you the most successful candidate possible.
Now, where I was headed, right, with that case study of this big, what became a big successful campaign, which at the time was not many people. I think it was you and one other person, and the then not yet governor of the state of Maryland. I remember very specifically you talking about how using social media and just pushing yourself out there. And it speaks to, I see a comment in the chat about editorials and letters to the editor. I would add social media, just content into that. But can you talk a little bit about, the tools that you used at the time that might still be applicable today to all different types of candidates who are trying to build a sort of public image, even if it starts a little slow, which can eventually become, a successful governor or senator or whatever office they might be running for even further down the road?
I mean, look, we used social media almost exclusively for the longest time because no reporter ever wanted to cover us. So it was the social media space, and what we would do is we would spend a lot of time on social media. We would do a lot of posts. We would share stories that we saw. We would give our opinion on those stories. We would turn those opinions into facts, and then we would continue to push it out. We would identify people that were also sharing our content. We would reach out to them. We would ask them to engage even further on the content that we had provided. And we just built this really strong network of people all over the state in order to be, in order to continue to grow the organization. And we did that well before we were ever a candidate for office. We letters to the editor, opinion pieces. We would get people to write letters to the editor on our behalf. We would then share those letters out. We would have people write opinion pieces that align with where we were. We would have those shared out. Look, I was telling a friend the other day, I think I could win a presidential race on $2 million. I don't think it would cost a lot of money to win a presidential race. Just utilizing earned media and social media in very small.
We're gonna have to talk a little bit more about that later. I don't think it's a subject for this exact conversation, but your master plan of a small budget.
But look, it doesn't take a lot of money to do this stuff, right? So in social media, if you're willing to take the time and the effort and you're willing to dedicate it, like you can raise your name ID, and successful campaigns are about name ID. That's all they're about. And everyone wants to say, oh yeah, it's not really, but no, it's really kind of like a high school popularity contest.
Well, let's talk. I mean, I think there is the point I would make, right, is very much that it was an effort in 14 about commenting, posting. I think Facebook was your at the time preferred tool. And sometimes when I speak to candidates, I'm sure you've had the same experience. The thinking is we have to do social media to build social media engagement, and we need to talk to the press to build press engagement, and talk to voters to get votes, and it all feels a little disconnected. But I'm curious, when you were first starting out, with any candidate really, but I think the example in 2014 is probably the most like this biggest success story that built the fastest.
Mm-hmm.
How did you connect the idea of building maybe a following online to building a following in person to ultimately getting votes and getting press coverage into one big brand that is this candidate that ultimately a lot of people in a state where maybe they shouldn't have on paper felt fondly about this guy, had a really high approval of the governor of the state. His own sort of name ID and his own public image was something that was very much looked upon favorably.
Yeah, look, I mean, we didn't really segregate out the voters versus social media versus news. They're all intertwined with each other. So we counted every social media contact, every single person that was following us, and it was Facebook primarily because it was so much different than it is today. But we were really, those were the same people. You know, every Facebook follower back then was actually a voter. It's changed a little bit today, but those people are voters, and as long as we had them and we were engaging them, they would hit their friends and they would hit their family. And one of the big things we did were selfies. So everywhere we went, we took photos, and we had a photographer with us everywhere we went, and he would take the photos, and then we'd post them to our social media spot. And then people that we ran into and we had these photos taken with, they were like, "Hey, where can I get a photo?" Blah blah. Oh, it's gonna be our Facebook page later today. Go to facebook.com/Larry Hogan. And they would share it, right? So all of a sudden we had people sharing their networks. "Hey, I was with Larry Hogan today. This is a really great guy. I could have a beer with him," right? So that's kind of how we built that out, right? And those genuine people sharing genuine experiences, meeting it and saying, "This is a really great guy. I mean, he stopped to take a selfie with me." I mean, that's kind of where we are in society as far as lowest common denominators, as far as voting priorities. But it's a really effective tool to show people that, hey, I'm supporting this person, right? It used to be yard signs, right? So we used to put a yard sign in our yard before social media, and people would know, oh, look, that guy supports so and so. Well, social media is like a giant yard sign operation. And the more people you have sharing your content saying, "I support this person," or "I support this belief," or whatever, it has an impact, positive or negative sometimes, but it's going to have an impact. And that's how social media can have an impact in your own elections, right? Getting people to share that content over and over again. You take a news article, right, that you may have participated in, or maybe you haven't participated in, but you can provide commentary on it, and you can then amplify it with a little bit of paid advertising. Which, when we talk about paid advertising, I mean, look, we've built organizations of 75,000 people with $5,000 paid advertising. So, you know, it's a very small amount, but it says promoted posts that hit people that are following you, that they share out. Those are the types of things that you can do to be successful. But I wouldn't silo off social media, earned media, and then the voter contact aspects, because ultimately, if you're hitting real humans in your social media, you're hitting voters.
Yeah, I think, you don't need a paid high quality, photographer following you around either. I mean, we've done campaigns, I know, in the past where it was one of us with our phones, and we'd pop into like a local favorite restaurant, or go to a little barbecue or something, or just walk around a public park even and introduce yourself to people and take a picture and say, "Hey, if you're interested, here's where the picture is going to be."
Yep.
And over time, it developed a sort of image of someone who's just everywhere. They care. They care so much that they're taking time out of their day to be in all of these different places, talking to all of these different types of people, and it gets reinforced online.
Yep.
Well, I want to open it up. We have some time left. I want to open it up to anyone who's on the call, who's any questions for myself, for Steve, about this broader topic around, well, if you're running, how do you start building, the image of yourself that you think is going to most resonate with voters and sustain that. So if anyone has any questions, you can come off mute, please. Feel free to ask, fire away at us.
I have a quick question about what to wear for interviews. So, and does the setting make a big difference? For example, I'm going to be interviewed at a festival this weekend, but I'm like, should I be wearing a button up because it's going to be 90, or should I be comfortable? And because you're talking about being authentic, I'm definitely authentic would be my t-shirt. So, but it's going to be, it's for a documentary on the sister senators in South Carolina. So I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts are on attire.
I would never show up to an event in a button up especially an outdoor event in South Carolina. Um, Probably a polo shirt. Um, you know, like a female cut polo shirt for you, is kind of the route I would go. Casual enough, but also, dress appropriate for the weather. T-shirts are fine too. I mean, it doesn't. I think it's just more important to be true to yourself and be in the moment of wherever you are. Like we almost never wore. Um, Hogan almost never wore button ups. Back in 2002, I worked for a candidate, and the same question came through, and we were like, "All right, well, your yard signs are red, so you got to have red." So he went out and he bought like 20 red button-up shirts, and all he wore was the same uniform. And there's something to be said about wearing a uniform, right? Wearing, your a logoed polo shirt at events like that, that are in the color of your yard sign, it makes an impact, especially if you do it over and over again throughout the entire campaign. But I I would be consistent in what I wear, but I would always dress for whatever the occasion is.
I remember, I remember the Hogan attire in 18 was always a black sport wear polo shirt. And I think the situation that sometimes comes up, especially for someone who's never run before, is I have to dress formal everywhere. I had a candidate once who used to knock doors, like go door knocking in 150-degree heat or whatever it was, wearing a suit and tie. And it felt weird.
Hogan wears Under Armour. That's all he wears. Under Armour polos, but that's because Under Armour is, kind of based in Maryland. So, find a local, whatever local company is there, and support the local company and wear their shirts or whatever. But the days of the button ups with the blue blazers or whatever. I think we're kind of past those stages now.
And I think it's nice, especially if you're dealing with a reporter, to just feel comfortable in your own skin. Obviously, you don't want to maybe underdress and put out an image of someone who maybe doesn't care about their self-image, right? Like going to a formal event or even just an outdoor event in a t-shirt filled with holes or something. Probably not a great look, but also at the same time, being confident, being comfortable, wearing what makes you feel confident and comfortable and fits the setting, I think is.
Look, I mean, I kind of think of it as kind of like Nixon when he was running against Kennedy the first time, right? So it's like on debate stage and he's sweating profusely. Like I'd be more concerned about sweat than.
I see Tony's got a hand up.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you. This is Tony Aiken, Providence, Rhode Island. I am running for a school board post for the first ever Providence, Rhode Island hybrid election coming up. So I am also a sitting board member. And, I'm a self-appointed treasurer, so I'm on a string shoe budget as well. So I love the tips that Steve gave in pretty much utilizing most of them. But this is a very crowded playing field. I have 4 other candidates that I'm running against. Some are very more well-known, have run in other campaigns, mayoral campaigns, and with the school campaigns. So how can a candidate best differentiate themselves in a crowded field like that, Steve? In your opinion?
Like you have to do it differently than they are. I always believe that you have to do everything that your opponents are doing, but then you have to do something else and you have to do it better, right? So, I don't know exactly what that would be specifically in your race, but you have to do something that captures people's attention that's different than what your opponents are doing. So, in any local race, there's certain things you have to do. It's based off the kind of the local political environment. In some states, everyone does yard signs, and so you have to do the yard signs because that's what everyone does. And then there's always these events that everyone goes to. But what the big question would be, what are you going to do differently than everyone else in order to be able to stand out? And sometimes that's as easy as, instead of just doing yard signs, you stand out on, you do sign waving, right? Because no one does sign waving in some states. Like in some areas of the country, no one does sign waving. But in other areas, everyone does sign. So if you can figure out what no one does, what's a political tactic that another campaign does somewhere else, that's a routine, and then you do it there, it'll make you stand out from your competition, because they'll be like, oh, what's Tony doing? She's crazy. That's not done here. But it'll be effective because
I've been called that.
people will recognize it and say, wait a sec, you're standing out, right? So something memorable that you're doing that no one else is doing.
Thank you.
I think also it could be a place, right? Going to places where people don't normally go. So there are sort of the checklist, I think, right, Steve,
Yeah.
where we would say, hey, you
Yeah.
have to go to the, the VFW, or you have to go to the local barbecue. Or
Yeah,
the,
so I was in Providence, Rhode Island back in, like, I think 1999, collecting signatures to get a presidential candidate on the ballot. And we hit the local hockey games.
I recognize your name. Thank you.
No, yeah, probably not. But yeah, so I mean, but it was it was 25 years ago, and we literally hit every all those little league hockey games to collect signatures on the ballot. We were able to do it within like 2 days, and get the guy on the ballot. But but I didn't see any other politicians at the hockey games. So
I see Eric has got a hand up. Eric, what's going on, man? You're on mute though. There you go.
Yes. Yeah, thank you. So I kind of have a couple of questions, but I'll just, since there's so many people, I'll ask the one. And going back to, you were talking about press and contacting editors or whatever, and then you mentioned controversy. In my race, kind of similar to Tony's, my race, I'm running locally, city council in San Jacinto. There are 8 other candidates, so there's 9 candidates. There are 3 incumbents. I'd like to stand out. I don't know if I don't mind going a controversial route. I'm curious as to sort of what would I, because I know, there is a lot of sort of bad press on, like, online about some of the candidates. So that's one direction. And then the other question I had is, when reaching out to, like, like for press to try to get attention that way, how do we, like, is it like a email, send like a electronic press release, or just kind of find them on social media? Like, what are the best ways, or the easiest, or the best ways, I should say, to, if I don't know anybody in the press, to try to get some attention?
if you can find their email addresses and email them directly with a nice little, it's like, hey, I'm one of the candidates for school board, and I'd love to talk to you. Just introduce myself and have a conversation. Do you have 15 minutes of your time to get together over a cup of coffee? More times than not, they're going to say yes. If you can't do it via email, direct message them, and whatever the Twitter or X or whatever it's called these days, or on Facebook or whatever. Just try to do it personally. Be as personal as you possibly can. Look, with 3 incumbents, I don't know the area, but if there's a lot of controversy, it sounds like it, because you've got 9 candidates running for 3 seats. They probably haven't done that great of a job. So, a challenger's race is not about you. The challenger race is about your opponent. It's about the incumbent. So what I would encourage you to do is really focus in on why the voters need to fire that person or those people. It's unfortunate, but it's just what it is. Everyone's going to vote for the person they're used to, unless they're told they can't support that person because there's been some sort of a quote unquote fireable offense. And then you have to be the acceptable alternative to the people that they need to fire.
there's a to add a positive spin to that as opposed to layoffs. But for folks who've been on these calls, they've heard me say before, elections are about choice, and in a challenger race for sure, it's are you better than the existing sort of status quo? And for sure, if there's 9 people running for 3 seats against 3 incumbents, there's probably an issue or something that matters to people that's not being addressed.
Yeah.
So it's identifying what is that issue, how do you feel about it, right? If you're aligned with the incumbents, it's not going to authentically sell. If you are saying, hey, these guys are doing a terrible job, but I would also do the exact same thing as they're doing. But
Yeah.
if you feel a certain way on whatever the issue is that is the opposite of how the incumbents are behaving, that can become your issue. It's like I'm running because this is how I feel, and if you feel the way that I feel, that change is necessary in this direction, then it's time to make that change.
Yeah, look, yeah, it's always challenging to take on incumbents, but I worked for a guy many years ago. He was a very successful business, very successful, far more successful than anyone I've ever known. And he's like, look, Steve, I spent my entire career standing out, convincing people that I was exceptional and above at the top of whatever I wanted to accomplish. The hardest thing for running for office is that now all of a sudden he had to try to convince people he was just like them, right? Because no one wants to vote for someone exceptional. They want to vote for someone that's just like them. And it was the most challenging thing for him to accomplish. But as a candidate, you, like I mentioned earlier, like this is someone I want to grab a beer with. Like that's what your people want to feel like they can be your friend. That they can relate to you and that you can relate to them, especially when important policy decisions are being. I tell clients this all the time, and I don't have a lot of political clients right now, but I tell them all the time, like, look, Tip O'Neill used to say all politics is local, and I'll tell you, every local decision is a political decision. And when you're leading a local body, whether it's school board or whether it's county commission or whatever, you're making decisions not necessarily based off policy, but off the politics of the area, right? And I think that that's really important moving forward as you're running your campaigns. It's like, okay, how am I going to govern? And I want to run my campaign like a governor, and I want to make sure that my messaging matches how I want to govern, because you're going to be held accountable when you get into office.
I see Dr. Ava's got a hand up. Ava, what's your question?
Hey, I'm running for school board. I just made it. That's had the primary election on Tuesday. So I was the top 2 to go. Thank you. Now that I running against an incumbent who's got all the money, I think I'm doing okay since I made it this far. But a lot of my issue, not gonna say my issue, but it's just that since I'm active duty, I have to be a nonpartisan period, and I think my moderate message is resonating. I've got my own. I think my authenticity works against the incumbent that comes off kind of fake, and I've been handling my own in debates, but now trying to transition. I got my hot pink, so I kind of wear my hot pink wherever I'm going. So I got people wanting to wear hot pink, and my signs are hot pink. They're not red or blue. And so that's working for me, but now trying to transition to now the general election, where why I was running was started because my son got hazed and how it was handled by the school board, but now and that's my why. So how do I kind of shift my why to a more general piece where the people were in my district, I have to represent those same people at that school that my son formerly was at, without alienating those people, where if I keep bringing it up, it almost seems like I'm bringing up negative press or negative things about the area. So trying to kind of not move beyond it, but I can't tell my why without the story.
I don't know if I would stop telling your story. And I don't think
Okay.
that I think that what allowed you to win the rate to move on to the general election is as a message that probably an overwhelming majority of people, even in that school district, would agree with. I mean, I think hazing's awful, and I think a lot of people do. And I don't know if I would change my messaging, just because now it's that school district, right? There might be some insiders or that might not like it, and may not vote for you, but most voters probably aren't even really connected to the school in any way. And I don't know, I don't think I would change my messaging at all, Taylor. I would keep
Okay.
on it and keep driving it home. Look, the education system, and I don't know where you are, but primarily it's broken everywhere, and parents are kind of frustrated and fed up with what's happening, especially ever since COVID, and they're looking for refreshing new voices. And I'm certain that in your district and in your area, in your school board, you're going to be able to point to some mistakes that this incumbent's made, and where you can create a significant contrast that an overwhelming majority of voters would support. It's going to be, the challenge is going to be getting that message out. And, if you can pull together other people that have also been victims or whatever, and do a press conference or do one-on-one interviews or whatever, people that would be willing to speak out against what's happened, even to them. I think that would be very powerful in your area.
I agree. I do.
Totally agree.
Thank you.
I think the thing I would add is that, and Steve's point of sort of building a community around an issue is where I would maybe start really marching towards, which is if it happened to your son and probably has happened to others, no parent, even if it hasn't happened to their kid, wants to be in a school district where people are not holding accountable behaviors that make the experience for students, whether it's unsafe or unhappy or more unusually difficult than just already being a kid in school has to be. And so I think that this is an opportunity for you to say people need to be held accountable if there's a problem and you've identified one, and talk about how you're going to do things differently. It's a huge part of your why is standing up for kids.
And the message cuts across party. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican, everyone can be unified on this.
Chris, I see a hand up.
Yes, how you doing?
How are you doing?
I'm doing
Good.
great. We're all in this together. We're all targets as a politician, I guess. I'm running for a commissioner position, and what I've been finding out, and I've been here a long time, know a lot of people. I keep things always positive, but there's some people that don't want me in that are for my other opponents, and they're triggering fake news, if you will. Okay, call it fake news, but it's just false information on social media. There's a digital made up newspaper. There's things that I'm seeing out there, and how much engagement should we as candidates defend those or just ignore them? And I mean, the first response of all of us candidates were like, that's not true. And where did you get that information? And then there's people that will argue. I watch threads of other candidates and I'm like, oh boy, they went into the lion's den, and all of a sudden it gets pretty ugly in there. How much should we engage with defending false news about anything? It could be anything. And there was something, I never got contacted by a newspaper or anything, and they print something that's false. How do you deal with it?
Well, I would go hard against the newspaper, right? Anyone that buys paper by the ton and barrel by the ink, you got to go hard on. I think social media is a little bit different animal, like in that you just kind of know it when you see it. And if someone has like 100 followers and none of them are in your district, you just kind of ignore it and don't worry about it. I think that
Yeah.
if it strikes your core of who you are, I think you got to fight it. If it's kind of peripheral, and it doesn't really impact your race, and you don't feel like it's going to impact the outcome, that's kind of when you ignore it. Look, I'm actually advising a candidate right now, informally, and I'm like, look, you got to stop. You got to stop making these statements because what we have degrees of attacks in a campaign, right? So it's like if someone attacks me on an issue and it doesn't really have an impact with voters, it's like, oh no, don't throw me in the briar patch here. You don't really care about it too much.
Yeah.
And then there's some attacks that you really have to care about because it strikes at the core of either who you are or where the voters are. And it's always race dependent and it's always issue and candidate dependent. But a heavy dose of common sense kind of tells you where you got to fight, what hills to fight on, which ones to lay down.
Well, correct. You choose your battles. So my campaign manager is like, hey, look, that guy doesn't have enough followers. The guy's just stirring stuff. He's like, I wouldn't even engage. He says, don't even engage. He goes, be the better person, rise above it, and keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's really good advice. I mean, look, we rarely engaged in fights with our opponents, especially if we were more popular and higher up. You want to get down in the mud with someone just trying to drag you down there, take the high road. A big fan of that mentality in general.
And that's what we're trying to do is keep that positivity going and don't let anybody bring us down, because it's tough when you get people that never met you and they don't like you because they heard something from a friend who heard it from a friend who, and it's
Right.
like, well, how about going to the source? And if you call me anytime, I'll answer your question. And that's where we're at today with social media and bad information out there. It's horrible.
Yeah, well, people get to hide behind their social media and they never get real contact with people. So,
Yes.
I think that, look, one thing I would say is like with radio or something, if someone calls in a radio station and criticizes you, I'd pick up the phone and call the radio station and go on and counter it, just because a lot more ears are on it than like a social media thing or what have you. Even in those situations, take the high road.
I would
Copy that.
I would
Okay.
echo that for
Thank
the
you.
press too. So there's an opportunity maybe that's landed in your lap. And I think sometimes the instinct of the candidate is to get very riled up if someone prints something that's unfavorable about you. And they send an email, an angry email to the journalist and say, you got this all wrong. You're full of it. Take it down, or I'm gonna rage at your outlet. And the journalists love that. It's an opportunity for them to write another story about how the candidate, cursed them out or is losing their marbles or whatever it is.
Yep, exactly.
What I would almost encourage you to do is send the journalists an email saying, hey, I saw this article. Would love to talk about it. I think there is maybe a record to be corrected here. And if you handle it nicely and you handle it professionally, I think at the worst case, assuming the journalist is writing for a credible, reasonable outlet, right? You're building yourself an opportunity to establish a relationship with someone who has an audience. I think we've got time for one
Thank
more
you.
question here. If anyone's got any last questions, I will say if you have more or if you want to continue this conversation online, you can always find us in Discord. I don't know I believe you are still here. If you want to pop the link to the Discord channel in the chat, that's where I'm spending a lot of time. The rest of our political team is here. And if we ever need to tap in Steve, I'm always happy to be a conduit to him as well. We've got one more question from Diana. Diana, we'll give you the mic here, and then we can sign off.
Well, thank you very much. After hearing everybody share some of their stories, I would like to know what the opinion of Steve and you is in regards to my opponent. My opponent is a 17-year candidate. I'm running for local office. We just moved from at-large to district. And he is currently the mayor. He has been the mayor for 3 2-year terms. Now, the problem with our mayor is that he has promised a lot, but he has failed to deliver. One of them being new businesses, actually having empty storefronts in our downtown. That's a huge issue, and part of that is poor decision making from our council. We have a big mixed development in our downtown area, and the development was supposed to have some type of anchor. We ended up with no anchor at all, and there was nothing to there was no feedback in regards to any future anchor. Yesterday, I went by the area. I was walking, doing one of my other assignments as a volunteer, and I actually took a peek inside of the area that was supposed to be a Laemmle Theater, because that was the decision that they chose. However, it's just a complete framework, and the Laemmle Theater went bankrupt in our state, in our county, California. So I know I'm a long shot in this, but a lot of people are fed up. A lot of people are tired. A lot of people are frustrated by the lack of respect that this person gives. He doesn't look people in the eye. He doesn't listen to the community. And so my approach is to go head on, to point out on my social media some of the issues that we're dealing with: the empty storefronts, the flip on the decision in reference to the anchor in this new development. I don't want to come off as being too negative, and my reputation is good in my community. I have served for over 20 years. I'm currently president of our Azusa Women's Club and have served in other leadership positions. So I'm just kind of wondering if approach like this is a good approach, to just not so much go for the juggler, but go for the juggler with class.
I mean, look, you have to, promises made, promises broken. It's kind of the way I would look at it.
Right.
And just constantly kind of hitting them. But you have to provide a solution as well. It's not enough just to tear it down. You got to provide a solution to the issues faced. Like elections are based off of a pretty simple formula. If people are generally happy with the direction their area is going in, they're not going to make a dramatic change. If they're not happy with this, the way things are going in a certain area, they're open to a change.
Yeah.
So it's your responsibility, number one, to identify the people that aren't happy, turn them into voices on your behalf, and create an echo chamber of change in the district that you're running. And that's the kind of the successful formula that you would have. So you can't ignore all the bad things that have happened. You've got to take them. You've got to take advantage of them. You've got to show that there is a solution to these issues, and your opponent, who's the incumbent, isn't the solution.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yep.
Well, thank you all for joining us tonight. Steve, thank you for participating and sharing your insights with this group and with those who are tuned in online and watching on social. Steve, I want to give you the last word here, just to send us home.
Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity, Jared. I really enjoyed it. Would be happy to do another one of these anytime. You've got my contact information. If anyone has a specific question regarding their race, I'm happy to provide just a little bit of initial feedback on whatever it is. And with all of you all, look, first, thank you. Thank you for stepping up. It's the most difficult thing anyone can do, is putting themselves and their name and their reputation out there for public office. It's not easy. I completely understand it. It's something that I personally probably would never do, just because I understand just how challenging it is. And, a lot of people say, well, politics isn't personal. But it is. Every single attack, every single comment someone makes, it's hard not to take any of that stuff personally. So I would encourage you not to take it personally. You'll get through it. And you can be successful and you can be victorious when you have supporters around you, and it's up to you to build that level of support around you and to communicate regularly and frequently with as many people as you possibly can.
Thank you guys all for tuning in tonight.
Yeah.
We will be back doing these. We do them once every 2 weeks or so. So we'll see you all very soon. And you can learn more about the next topic again in our Discord account, which Quinn is thrown into the chat here. So hopefully we'll see you guys in there. We'll see you in a couple of weeks to talk the next sort of subject in campaign land. But until then, thank you guys for tuning in tonight, for listening, for asking good questions.